Well, good morning everybody and welcome back. I just woke up this morning and we've just received some very exciting news regarding the old school RuneScape economy, a dedicated blog to some of the major issues in the OSRS economy. There are some very impactful and drastic measures in here, including a grand exchange tax, among a few other things. I'm going to give you my opinion on it as always, as well as just of course covering the entire blog to keep you informed. I hope you guys enjoyed the video as always. If you do, always appreciate a like on the video. Anyway guys, let's get into it. So I think you guys probably are aware as well as I am that the RuneScape economy has been, well, a bit unstable for a long time now. There are of course hundreds of different factors that people bring up. Some big ones are we don't really have major gold sinks or major item sinks. So over time, popular items will just continue to stack up, and of course their value just keeps declining. Now this is a fairly deeply ingrained issue, and it's not something that's only affecting the modern era of RuneScape. This has been an issue forever, partly why RuneScape 3 introduced an entire skill to try to help combat that. So with all that said, what are jagex's plan to tackle the economy issue? Let's dive in. So whether or not you're selling PVM drops, stocking up on your next big PKing trip, or simply in the market for skill boosters, the economy underpins everything in old school RuneScape. It may sound a bit dry, but it's actually pretty interesting to think about how all of it works, and we reckon we have some pretty good solutions for keeping it healthy and improving your game experience, including more bank space. Okay. So first up, how does the economy work in old school? Well, item prices are dictated by players and they fluctuate based on the number of coins available in the game. Essentially, if there's more gold coming into the game than leaving, then we experience inflation. The value of gold falls and the item costs more to compensate. If the demand for an item goes up, it will rise in price. If the supply of an item is higher than the demand, prices go down. So obviously, they're just summarizing here how at a very basic level, the economy of old school and many others work. Fine, so what are the solutions? Well, the first one here, and probably the most impactful, a grand exchange tax. Now, this is something that they proposed a few times, and it would 100% be the ultimate gold sink because so many people use the grand exchange. So let's see exactly how impactful this tax is going to be. So the grand exchange is old school RuneScape's auction house, and the vast majority of player-to-player trades take place here. It is currently untaxed, but to help remove wealth from the game and to slow the rate of inflation, we'd like to explore taxing items sold through the grand exchange. So they're thinking of adding a tax amount of 2% that would be removed from the final sale value. So this means that there'd be no change to what the buyer pays, as the tax is always passed on to the seller. In the case of selling multiple stacks, the tax would be applied per item sold rather than to the total received. So obviously, talking about this, I'm going to have some personal biases here, just my opinion, but a 2% tax sounds enormous. I mean, unless there is a cap to how much the tax can apply or some kind of variable tax structure, flat 2% sounds enormous. For example, selling a twisted bow would tax you 16 mil, which of course is significant. That is enough, I think, to deter people using the grand exchange for selling items over 100 mil even. So a lot more player-to-player trades, which is not inherently bad, but of course there is rampant scamming, so I think personally 2% sounds pretty high. Just to be clear, not against the tax overall, but you could probably divide that by 5 and still have a pretty significant tax. So the other part here, in the case of selling multiple stacks, the tax would be applied per item sold rather than to the total received. I'm a little unclear how those two would vary and what exactly that means, but let's move on for now. Okay, so next up here we have item sinks. So while the introduction of a grand exchange sales tax helps reduce the amount of gold in the game, it doesn't reduce the number of items available. That is of course true, and a lot of people argue that we need more so item sinks than we do gold sinks. So what exactly is their plan? Well, they highlight that old school has almost no mechanisms where items will be removed from the game. Some items have very specific situational sinks, for example the Abyssal Tentacle, but it only works for a very specific item, so it's not a very scalable solution. So with the introduction of a grand exchange tax, there is a huge opportunity to introduce effective and scalable item sinks. So what they could do is use the tax collected from the grand exchange sales to purchase items from other players with the simple intention of deleting the item from the game. Essentially, rather than just deleting the coins that are taxed, we can spend them and buy items off players and delete them. So this doesn't need to be the case for every item in the game, of course, but we'd have the flexibility to pick and choose. So this is a really interesting solution and probably one of the more popular item sinks that has been proposed over the last year or two. Personally, I think it's a really good idea. Now, one question I have is how exactly would they pick and choose if they do? Obviously, there could be a ton of debate regarding which items should be sunk from the game. I think alternatively than picking and choosing, they could just have the sale from every item sink itself. So if you sell a twisted bow, then that money can only be used towards buying another twisted bow. That would probably be the most fair and least messy, however it may also be the most challenging to code into the game, but I'm not really sure about that. So down below they go a little bit more in depth on how exactly this would work. So when a tax trade takes place in the Grand Exchange, we'd allocate an amount of wealth from those taxes to a virtual coffer. This coffer would then be used to fund the purchase of a specific item that's chosen by us and based on the estimated quantity of the item entering the game per day and the amount we'd like to reduce. So essentially there would be two restrictions on how these would be removed from the game. First, there needs to be enough money in the virtual coffer for an item to be removed in this way. Two, there's going to be a cap to how many of a certain item can be removed per day so that they don't interfere and create supply issues. So if the item cap hasn't been reached and there's enough money in the virtual coffer, so if that's all true and a player goes in and sells a twisted bow, instead of completing the offer and giving it to somebody else, they will instead delete the item, immediately pay the player the number of coins. That is it. The item has then been removed. So really important here, what items are going to be included as part of a Grand Exchange tax item sink. Mostly it's going to be very popular PVM items. So we have the Spectral and Arcane Spirit Shields. We have the Nightmare Staff and the Orbs. We have a large amount of the Raids 1 rares, so the Twisted Bow, the Elder Maul, the Kodai Insignia, the Din's Bulwark, and the Prayer Scrolls. We have a lot of God Wars items, so God Swords, Armadillo Armor, Banda's Armor, Saradomin Swords, and the Zamorakian Spear. We have the Abyssal Bludgeon, the Kraken Tentacle and Trident, the Smoke Battle Staff, the Occult Necklace, and the Toxic Blowpipe. So I think that's a good start to the list, although I wouldn't stop there. I think there's a ton of other viable items to put on this list. But either way, I think it's a very exciting proposition. Now, keep in mind, all of this is not going to be polled, as I consider it a matter of integrity, which, yeah, I think it is. So that is the major proposition here, and overall, I like the idea. I do think the tax is pretty high, as it will greatly disincentivize people using the Grand Exchange for high-end items, which may actually impact how effective the item sink is. Okay, so that is integrity changes, but there are two other things here that they are proposing that I think are interesting. First up, additional bank space. So currently the maximum bank size is 816 spaces. However, with a potential update, the maximum size could be increased to 1200, which is a massive increase. So what they're proposing is you wouldn't get this for free, but you could pay coins to get additional bank space, and this would cost a lot. So bank space would come in blocks and would be a non-refundable and permanent unlock. So this would scale up from the first blocks costing 1 mil each to eventually costing 500 mil for the final block. That's significant, but I mean, definitely not required to have that much bank space, and what else are you going to spend your money on at a certain point? So another potential giant gold sink here as well, just from bank space, potentially sinking nearly 900 mil per player. That said, that is polled. Okay, so finally here, probably the most memey one here, but I love it, a literal gold sink. The gold sink would be similar to one of the other flex items in the POH, and I think would cost around 102 mil or 101 mil. That is also being polled. So that is it for the integrity changes in poll blog. Overall, I think it's a really good approach. I think there are some really good ideas here. Of course, maybe tweaking the numbers slightly or adding in new items for the sink I think would be good. But overall, just really happy that they're tackling it and have a concrete plan. And it looks like it's actually going to be coming to the game. So anyway, guys, what do you think about this blog? Down below, let me know as always. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Now, before I go here, guys, I want to give a giant thank you to all of my members over on YouTube. Thank you so much to Sejuani's Flail, The Hybrid, Ocelot, and Kush Patel for all being subscribed at the Dragon tier. You guys are awesome. Thank you guys so much, as always. Also another giant shout out to Mexos, Basetich, MDM001, and Yo-Yo Sub 89 for being subscribed at the Runite tier. Thanks a lot, guys. As always, if you guys are looking for another way to support the channel, becoming a YouTube member is an awesome way to do so, get immortalized in all of my future videos, get a custom role in my Discord server, and get access to my video release schedule. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you next time.